You ever actually stop to think about how popular anime is now? As someone born in the 90s and from people coming in even earlier years, it's been a wild ride watching anime go from some unknown and sometimes weird art form to a well-known but still under the radar niche, and then now to becoming a full-blown worldwide staple of culture. Shows like Dandadan, Jujutsu Kaisen, Chainsaw Man, they're all new releases with international fan bases that are just as dedicated and sometimes even more than the Japanese audience. I've talked about my history with anime before on this channel, watching DBZ and Yu Yu Hakusho as a kid, seeing the wild worlds of Inuyasha and Cowboy Bebop thanks to Toonami and Adult Swim. And years down the road later, growing into a big-ass, dumbass weeb that is way too plugged into both anime and, even more so, manga. So, being someone that's so loudly into these mediums, literally just getting back from a 2-week trip to Japan in early January, I've talked a lot with my real-life friends about anime, what they might be interested in watching, the new updates on what's coming out, whatever. And when it comes to the question of, well, I want to get into anime, but I don't really know where to start, I got plenty of suggestions. You got Death Note, Cowboy Bebop, Gurren Lagann, JoJo, Black Lagoon, Hellsing, Dragon Ball, and Yu Yu Hakusho. These are all things I've recommended to people who, despite them not really loving anime, watch these and enjoyed them so much that they started to look more into this whole big-ass world of Japanese animation. And dude, that fucking rules! And with that said, there's one anime that I feel like stands almost at the top of the anime newcomer pile. A series that's on everyone's starter pack lists. Something that took the American anime fandoms by storm in the early 2000s, and despite how much time has passed, the world of both manga and anime having changed so much since then, is still extremely talked about, recommended, and put in greatest of all time lists. Obviously, I'm talking about the duo anime for the series Fullmetal Alchemist. Both the 2003 release and the reboot series Brotherhood done by the same studio, Bones. Each of them based on the original manga sharing the same name of Fullmetal Alchemist, a series created and drawn by Hiromu Arakawa. It going on to alter the landscape of anime fandoms forever, with those two shows I mentioned being both certified highly rated classics, but also are the things that got me back into anime after drifting away for a really long time. And with that said, today I want to dive into the reason that this channel technically even exists in the first place in some ways. The reason I fell back into this world and largely became the person I am today. This is Fullmetal Alchemist. So, like I had said, Fullmetal was created by Hiromu Arakawa, an artist who was both born and raised on the farm with the fucking cows, coming from Hokkaido and spending her early life living on a dairy farm with her family, it becoming a pretty integral part of her personality. But, despite this country lifestyle, she had always wanted to be an artist since grade school, already creating her own stories and taking painting classes for a large chunk of her childhood. Growing up, leaving the farm and moving to Tokyo in '99, where she was able to get on with Square Enix as an assistant, working now in their magazine manga division, submitting her own one-shots, and then 2 years later in 2001, starting the hit series Fullmetal Alchemist. It running from July of 2001 to June of 2010 in Monthly Shonen Gangan, a Square Enix magazine with another big name thing running at the same time, Soul Eater, it getting 27 total volumes. years. Now, like I had already said earlier, it kinda goes without saying that FMA is, extremely popular. With over 80 million volumes sold worldwide, Fullmetal is one of the world's best-selling manga, like overall. It getting those 2 separate anime adaptations that basically exploded its popularity even further, as we'll talk about later. It's had movies, both animated and live action, video games, light novels, merch out the ass, and even all these years later after its ending has kept a hard locked hold on the top spots of manga and anime fans' tier lists. So, with all that basic info laid out and my glazing of its mass appeal aside, what is Fullmetal Alchemist? Why is this something you'd recommend new anime watchers, and why is it kept in over 20-year-long chokehold? Specifically on aging anime fans that will go to war online so Brotherhood never loses its top spot on my anime list. Well, before we dive deeper to break it all down and really spoil things, let's look at the first few chapters of Fullmetal and see the world that Arakawa sets up from the start. A world of both seemingly fantastical magic and also deep tragedy that has spawned generational conflicts, following the lives of 2 brothers and the path they walk down in this world. The duo of Edward and Alphonse Elric. Oh, and hashtag like, comment, subscribe. It's a new year and I kinda wanna keep making videos like this as long as I can, as fast as I can, or until YouTube explodes. Throughout life, one of the most common types of expressions you hear from people is, well, you gotta spend money to make money. Or, you get what you give a little, you take a little. And in the world of Fullmetal Alchemist, these are more than just phrases. Using the power of alchemy and ability to take raw materials and rework or transmute them, altering their makeup at an atomic level to form something new. Alchemists are basically magicians that can skirt around the walls of the world to make something out of something, changing one material to another. Be it simple things like scrap parts and building materials to form a box or a radio, all the way to taking carbon and oxygen from the air and transmuting it into explosions of flame. Meaning that for all intents and purposes, despite the restriction of needing one thing to make another, alchemists are basically wizards, drawing their transmutation circles on the ground, on their gloves, wherever it works for their alchemy, and altering the laws of creation itself. This all taking place in a pseudo-1940s-ish militaristic world where most people seemingly live under a overreaching stratocracy, a word I looked up for this video. A military-led government using both alchemy and the alchemists who specialize in it as tools for the state. This world ebbing and flowing between a pursuit of knowledge and creation using this fantastical but scientific magic, and an almost constant wartime rule of law. The nation of Amestris obviously having real-world parallels we'll cover later. And in the countryside of this empire, tucked away in the small village of Risenbull, live 2 brothers named Edward and Alphonse Elric. 2 kids that, despite being incredibly young, have a love for both alchemy and also just knowledge itself. The 2 constantly absorbed in textbooks and practicing their own basic transmutations. Until, some things happen, and now all of these years later, the 2 boys have grown up a bit. Well, one seemingly much more than the other. Edward becoming a full-fledged alchemist that works for the military, earning the rank of State Alchemist along with the title of Fullmetal Alchemist. Why Fullmetal? Anyway, tagging along by his side is younger brother Alphonse. Except somehow the younger brother seems to be about 4 feet taller than Ed. wearing a full suit of armor and towering over most regular adults. The duo wandering into an isolated town on the hunt for something related to Ed's state alchemist job, with this desert city living under a total theocracy, led by a priest who can seemingly alter matter in a way similar to alchemists. Except, unlike any other alchemist, claims he can bring the dead back to life. A statement both Ed and Al can't walk away from. Like I said before, to use alchemy in this world, one thing must be given up for another, a concept referred to as equivalent exchange, which makes sense. When it comes to alchemy, the material is just basically transmuted to a final product. The stuff in A is going to be the same stuff in B. But to claim you can bring the dead back to life, of course, would mean that you need the ingredients for not only a human body itself, but the soul of whoever you're trying to revive. It's not like you're just trying to make a husk of a corpse. You gotta get the personality somehow. Meaning you'd have to reach over to some kind of other side and bring that lost soul back to the body you've created. This being referred to as a human transmutation, a practice that is explicitly banned and highly illegal. It being seen as something blasphemous, like you're stepping into the realm of God. The alchemist in question basically playing God themselves and creating life, with this priest-tater claiming he is the voice of God and can perform miracles like bringing the dead back with ease, leading our brother duo to confront him and accusing him of using something referred to as a philosopher's stone, an artifact described as a stone with infinite alchemic power, able to totally transcend the walls of alchemy and transmute things that usually you'd not be able to. The exact thing that state alchemist Edward is looking for. You see, when it comes to the idea of human transmutation and bringing the dead back to life, Ed and Al are, unfortunately, experts in that field. The brothers themselves having fallen into the temptation as kids and, after losing their mother to the dreaded anime mom disease, attempted to revive her by transmuting the ingredients of a human body and their own blood as a substitute for the soul. The transmutation going extremely wrong and the brothers being sucked away to somewhere else that we'll talk about more later. These tendril-like hands covering them and, for Edward, transmuting his leg straight off his body, tossing the kid back a bloody mess and realizing that not only is his leg gone, Al has totally vanished. Meaning that while Ed may have lost a leg, more importantly, he lost his younger brother as well. And before he can even really panic due to what is going on, in the middle of their transmutation circle was something barely human, something horrific, and possibly the something that these brothers turned their own mother into. In a panic, Ed grabs one of his dad's old suits of armor off the wall and, using his own blood once again, attempts another human transmutation, this time linking both his soul and Al's together and trapping it in a seal made of blood, Ed drawing it himself on the inner neck of the armor, Alphonse returning from the other side but without his body, meaning that his soul is now trapped in this huge set of metal armor. And while Ed was trying to rescue Al on that other side, like before with the leg, Edward had lost something else in order to gain Al's soul back. That alchemic equivalent exchange. Him first losing his leg to transmute the thing that became his mom, and now losing his right arm also he could bring Al's soul back. The duo walking away from this event scarred mentally, physically, and emotionally. Ed having lost 2 limbs, Al his whole body, and now having to live with the fact that they might have forced their mom's soul into a horrific monster. Something that seemed to be in constant pain like the Eraserhead baby or some shit. Them growing and going on to dedicate their lives now on the hunt for a way to fix themselves. Ed wanting his limbs back and, more than that, wanting to bring his brother's body home. Alphonse living a weird half-life in this armor, able to talk, walk, hear, and see, but really nothing else. Able to do alchemy and fight battles with his brother, but unable to eat or taste, to sleep, to smell, or feel touch. Being alive, technically, but in a way that is inherently torturous. Them now on a non-stop quest of knowledge to learn of a way that can fix this shit. With that legendary Philosopher's Stone being their biggest lead, them busting apart the evil priest regime and learning that his stone was a fake, exposing him as a false prophet and also destabilizing the leadership / religious faith of this town in the process. The duo setting back off across the nation in search of more clues to the stone itself, all the while deepening their knowledge about alchemy and its place in the world. From here, the story of Fullmetal begins to open up, both in a small scale with the characters and their relationships between each other, and in a large country-spanning way with the growth of alchemy as a concept, introducing things like the homunculus, the Ishvalans, and the idea of God itself in this world based on science. But before we dive deeper with the characters and real story discussions, I feel like there's an aspect of Fullmetal that kinda gets consistently overlooked online, largely due to the fan base being more focused on the 2 anime adaptations, and it's something that comes right from Arakawa herself in the manga. That being the absolutely fantastic art style she grows into throughout the series. When reading Fullmetal's first chapters, I would describe the starting art as really solid. From minute 1, Arakawa is able to create a cast of characters who all look very different from each other. A lot of them having traits that, while for sure are still staples of manga characters, but are also surprisingly realistic. Yeah, some are over the top, but overall, the design sense is toned down and focus more on the faces and their reactions. Body shapes both big and small, the things that make a person unique, letting them feel real on a level deeper than a more generic style would. A little bit of a tangent, but it kinda reminds me of something like Urasawa, where his character designs range from big noses and stumpy bodies to the perfect Bishonens, characters who are largely super believable, but then you have 1 or 2 who stand alone in their manga-ness with their perfect faces. And with Arakawa's art in Fullmetal, I feel like it's a firm split down the middle of realistic ass people who have tired, aged faces or unique cultural traits to them, and some absolute anime-ass anime designs, having just overall freaks, big buff daddies and badass bitches, little gremlin-ass monsters, and even weird-ass interpretations of God. Every cast member standing out in their own unique way, having designs that are, at least to me, super memorable. And the thing I feel like is most important to note about this cast in the early chapters is that outside of Fullmetal, Arakawa has only ever had 2 other officially published one-shots. And yeah, sure, she was an assistant on Mahojin Gura Gura for a while as well. But that aside, Fullmetal was her first actual run with a big manga presence. This was her first real artistic and storytelling showcase, and even in these early chapters, she was obviously extremely talented in more than a few ways with the examples I've shown. But as the series would progress and the cast would grow, them getting into larger fights and traveling the world she sets up over the next 10 years during the series' monthly chapters, Fullmetal's artistic progression would begin to take form into something really memorable and, in my eyes, extremely strong. Like, I know people can criticize it and go, well, it doesn't look like something like Vagabond or Berserk. And it's like, yeah, sure, Arakawa's style may be a bit simpler compared to those, but it excels in that simplicity. Take Edward, for example. Like, yeah, he is a shonen protagonist design. The round eyes, the solid but not too over-the-top outfit, the blonde ponytail, and the metal limbs for flair. But due to Arakawa's fantastic artistic ability, she can take that basic design and shift it in so many ways, which takes Ed and solidifies his style as a character into being something extremely bold and defined. One of his major and coolest traits, the reason he's called the Fullmetal Alchemist to begin with, being his artificial arm and leg. Replacements for the ones taken from him during his earlier mentioned transmutation tragedy, them created out of something called automail, which are basically total prosthetic limbs made up of unique metals and intricate wiring. Steampunk as hell, honestly, and it really adds to the entire vibe of this pseudo 1940s world. Automail itself able to function as both basic limbs, but also cannons, chainsaws, whatever. The world full of just as many automail mechanics as there are alchemists, a topic I'll touch on later. And sure, a lot of that main cast have designs that fall into a more anime style, people like the Homunculus Squad, Armstrong, and the original Greed. But then you have characters like Dr. Marco, Mustang's whole team, Lean, King Bradley, people who for sure still have those manga design tropes, but are also varied in their actual traits and stand out so far from each other that I never really feel like any of the sidecasts falls into forgettable / generic territory, which is a huge compliment. As much as I love artists like Oda, Hiro Mashima, or even Toriyama, you can spot their character designs from miles away because of their own unique tropes. But for Arakawa to create that huge difference between these designs in her very first major manga is just pure natural talent, going back to the phrase simple but effective, and locks in that cast on a much more memorable level. And with that in mind, one of the things that makes Fullmetal so beloved, a thing that takes this already strong cast and launched them to the hearts of fans for over 20 years now, is how Arakawa can take her characters from both one end of the scale with deep emotion and over-the-top combat, to the total other end with some absolute goof troop type shit. Big loud faces, dumbass humor, and extremely silly reactions. As I'll talk more about later, FMA gets into some fairly dark territory. It's a series that touches on a lot of big concepts with some tough questions. So to balance out that heaviness, Arakawa takes the cast and makes 3/4 of them total dipshit goobers, who, yeah, sure are involved with world-ending type battles, but themselves are made up of over-the-top uber dads, loving wife and husband badasses, cocksure army officials who constantly get shown up by their own troops, and of course, our main brother duo themselves are the kings among dipshits. Edward constantly on edge because at any moment, someone might call him short. A true statement, sure, but one that transforms Ed into either a gremlin or a demon depending on the situation. He also absolutely hates drinking milk, and I wonder if that's Arakawa from her dairy farm days plugging herself in right there. while Alphonse, despite being an intimidating suit of armor, has this adorable chibi face with the dotted eyes and pointed mouth, doing things like hiding stray kittens in his armor and trying to be the straight man matched with Ed's over-the-top ass, but doing things that always remind you, even with his hulking appearance, he's still just a kid inside. For what it's worth, and despite how serious the actual overarching plot gets, Arakawa never loses that sense of humor, that willingness to draw her characters as total goblins, be it chapter 1 or chapter final. It elevates the series up to a whole new level because it creates a massive cast that I really actually love. Something that to me is the greater whole itself as to what makes FMA so special. But before we get into that cast and their stories, there's one last aspect to Arakawa's art that I want to talk about. The other big factor that propelled her series to popularity fairly quickly, and only grew stronger as the chapters continued. This being the phenomenal combat from start to finish. It all being mixed together with the unique power system that is alchemy. So from the first volume forward, it was clear that at the core of FMA, the series was a battle shonen. Ed and Al busting ass in the desert city of Lior, and the action growing in both scale and intensity as the story went on. Arakawa, despite being so good at creating that sense of goofiness and dumb humor in her pages, also knows how to make extremely well choreographed, intense, and thoughtfully planned out fights between the cast. The back and forths being super easy to follow, as well as just being hella fun to read. Any series that has pseudo-realistic, well-drawn sword fights will always grab my attention. The thing that sets it apart from similar manga with that solid hand-to-hand combat, at least to me, is also one of the major things that makes Fullmetal such a solid anime entry point in the first place. And it's that this combat is mixed in with the use of alchemy. The alchemists themselves able to make weapons on the fly, turning the environment around them into tools for their combat. Be it arm blades, spears, cannons, big ass punches that alter the makeup of whatever they hit, converting anything into a bomb with just the touch of your fingers. There is a huge list, but outside of this just being a really fun style of battle, the reason I think it can help ease in new anime fans is because unlike Hunter x Hunter or JoJo for example, series with big famous power systems, alchemy isn't nin level complicated or JoJo level weird with stay-ins right from the start. It's based around the realistic and logical laws of the world. It's a tool for science, so the combat surrounding it has to follow these logical and fairly realistic rules, which is something that I think is both super smart and a super fun way to convey battles in the series. Honestly, it reminds me of Avatar: The Last Airbender, where the combat there is heavily focused around bending abilities, but the act of bending itself is a pretty natural part of the world, something that's a function in society itself. And just like here in Avatar, with Fullmetal, it adds an extra layer of depth to the world and the people in it due to the realistic nature of these fights, easing you into the world along with the brothers themselves as they encounter all these wild-ass alchemists and their insane specialized interests. Now as for the fights themselves and how they play out, god damn does Arakawa know how to draw some hard-ass action. At first, despite being solid from the get-go, it does have a very shonen vibe to it, mixing both lighthearted comedy and fairly lighthearted combat, but soon after shifting into brutal fights of life or death against inhuman monsters, nationalistic serial killers, and eventually parts of the military itself. Some people in combat using their unique alchemical transmutations to attack their enemies, and others just blasting total ass with guns, rifles, swords. Real traditional warfare combat shit. Side tangent, but going back to my Soul Eater and Hellsing videos from years ago, I said there that I'm a huge fanboy of intricate logos and unique iris designs. Things like Alucard's gloves or Black Star's starry-eyed madness are my direct-to-brain type of shit. And that love shines through hard here with things like the transmutation circles, the hand-drawn alchemic formulas written by an alchemist that serve as the platform for their transmutation. A user either drawing the circle on the ground and transmuting it on that spot itself, or some like Roy Mustang, the Flame Alchemist, drawing the formula on gloves and snapping his fingers to explode whatever's in the way. I love this aesthetic sensibility so much, doubly so for things like the homunculus Ouroboros logo being tattooed on an eye. 10 out of 10 shit to me. And talking about those transmutation circles and combat itself, due to plot reasons, Edward is able to skip that circle process, no longer needing to draw them and instead clapping his hands together and able to pop off a transmute with no issue. Meaning that, unlike most other alchemists in the world, as long as Ed has two hands, he has alchemy at his side on the ready. Unfortunate that one arm is prosthetic and breaks like all the damn time. But on the flip, this does mean that his combat abilities are much more open-ended than some others could be, able to transmute that prosthetic arm itself into a multiform weapon with just the clap of his hands. Something that to this day is still cool as hell each time he does it. Another aspect to the combat that I feel like can draw in first-time anime fans, and is something I had already personally said I loved, is that sword and gun combat that are still at the high tier of damage and lethality like they should be. I love me a big-ass power shonen. I'm literally reading Fairy Tail and Naruto as I take breaks between editing this video. Trust me, that is and will forever be my shit. But that realistic back and forth where a single bullet can still mean death in this world with quote-unquote magic means that even with all these transmutations, each battle feels like one where the stakes are high, where one slip could mean the death of a cast member. Characters like the Mustang Squad fighting all of their battles with guns or blades, having some of the best moments in the series. Shout out Riza Hawkeye. Yeah, and I'll throw it in here, probably where Arakawa is a woman author, FMA has a long list of strong women characters like Hawkeye, Major Armstrong, Azumi Curtis, Lanfan, Winry, Martell. Like, honestly, some of these people are probably more beloved than Ed or Al even. Major Armstrong altered my brain when I first watched this as a teenager. Big Satsuki from Kill la Kill energy. That's my thing, I love it. Anyway, despite these early battles being very one-on-one focused, the later parts of the series shift into full-on large-scale warzone battles between soldiers, mixed in with alchemists and freak-ass monsters. The larger cast all playing their own parts in this growing story that's slowly starting to dive into the horrors of war, genocide, and religion. Both the connections and divisions between all of us. Now, from here, I want to get a bit spoilery and talk about one of the main reasons that Fullmetal became so beloved all those years ago, and largely is still highly regarded to this day, that being the combination of both the storyline in Fullmetal and the characters that fill it. Still having one of the most famous casts worldwide to this day. Obviously, I'm still gonna talk about both of the anime, 2003 and Brotherhood, so if you want to avoid any spoilers and just hear my thoughts on those specifically, here's a time code. You can just skip to here, that's all good. Over the last 10 years or so, I've shown FMA to more than a few people, some watching it on their own and some together with me in a group watch. And the thing I started noticing as time went on was that everyone talked about the series to me in pretty much the same way, bringing up the characters and the moments between them more than the actual plotline itself. So, when I was preparing for this video, rewatching parts of each anime and fully reading the manga, I kept that thought in my head and spent over a month dedicating myself to Fullmetal all day, every day. And once it was said and done, I came with a takeaway that might be considered a little spicy. It might get people mad at me, but I'ma say it anyway. And it's that while the overall main plot of FMA itself, the story of Father and his plans to transmute God, isn't bad at all, but this time I walked away caring much more about the cast and their personal struggles within this unique militaristic world than the, well, kinda standard shonen backplot the story culminates with. Like I've alluded to earlier in the video, the world of Fullmetal is a very metaphorical one. Its government being basically allegories of real-life military dictatorships, be it something like the Nazis or even Soviet Union. Like, I'm sure it was a conscious choice to choose the title for King Bradley to be Führer. Our characters all come from either a nation locked in endless wars, or countries that have been devastated by that warmongering military government. And this is a major through line that runs not only down the plot itself, but also between each individual person within that plot. Before the story starts, one of the major events that's taken place is the Ishvalan War, a military campaign that began with forced occupation from the Emestrian nation into the land of Ishval, tensions rising and eventually, due to the murder of a young Ishvalan boy that was shot down by an Emestrian soldier, technically, a full-blown civil war breaks out. The much larger and more well-equipped Emestrian military sending in the state alchemists and basically doing an Order 66 on them. Their mission from Führer King Bradley himself being to totally wipe out the Ishvalan people. Complete decimation. Their cultural leader offering himself as a sacrifice to the military and government, hoping that this can maybe halt their genocide. To which Bradley face to face tells him to fuck off and continues the campaign, almost wiping the Ishvalan race off the face of the planet, giving birth to a whole new form of generational hatred. Characters like the serial killer / vigilante Scar basically being the rage of a destroyed culture, tearing through the country on the hunt for people related to that civil war. State alchemists especially seeing as how they were literal human weapons that were kind of the equivalent of localized nukes, using their alchemy to slaughter innocent civilians. Some loving their job as they killed for total fun, and others realizing the actual horror of what they were doing, but kept following orders. This war is also the reason that Automail had an explosive growth in the country of Amestris. So many troops and civilians losing limbs in the war and Automail being so functionally useful. The now post-wartime era having tons of people getting these metal prosthetics and some using them as weapons, while others are just trying to deal with the hand they were dealt, trying to move on with their lives keeping some sense of normalcy. Now, obviously, this is a parallel to the real world, with this kind of brutal one-sided warfare taking place throughout history. And as the 1900s forward comes around and documentation of world events becomes more widespread, over the last 100+ years, There's a long list of events you can compare Fullmetal's Ishvalan extermination to, things that Arakawa obviously took influence from. It goes without saying that the Nazi allegories exist, but there's also the fact that the Amestrian military arrested and created internment camps for nationalized Ishvalan citizens, a thing we here in America also boldly did during World War II to Americanize Japanese citizens, be them foreigners living in the US or some that were just even straight up born here. There's the fact that at the core, this is a desert conflict between a larger, globalized, powerful nation and small groups of people who are easily comparable to tons of different real-world faiths and cultures. And with Fullmetal beginning in 2001, the year in which after 9/11 happened, America launched a brutal campaign in the Middle East, tons of troops walking away with horror stories from the things they both saw and were ordered to do while there. I'm sure that affected the entire direction of where the manga was going in a little bit of a way. And even now, here in 2025, gonna step on some toes probably, but fuck it, I don't care. You have the continuing genocide of the Palestinian people at the hands of Israel, which, regardless of your opinions on who started what or whatever shit, the endless amounts of footage coming out of Gaza showing the actual ongoing extermination taken out on an entire culture of people is fucking horrifying. And now coming back to Fullmetal with the Ishvalan Civil War, reading it through 2024/5, it's impossible for me not to make those comparisons and see how both then and right now, Arakawa was able to capture that exact reality of war, the pointless slaughter and the ideas of just following orders, transferring it back into the cast at large, with most of the characters having to, in one way or another, confront the evilness that these conflicts were and walk away with their lives changed. A big chunk of the characters come from a military background. Mustang, Hawkeye, Armstrong, Hughes. They are all tried and true officers who earn their ranks by following orders to the letter, fulfilling their obligations to superior officers and King Bradley himself. Thing is, these orders involved almost that entire military cast having taken part in the Ishvalan Civil War. The front line needed more troops, and due to the scale of invasion taking place, government officials sent every commanding officer they could, but also fresh-faced academy graduates. These young adults being forced to grab rifles and in their first actual conflict, not just take on enemy fighters in another nation, but the actual people of that nation themselves. The non-combatants, the women, the children, it's fucking shoot on sight. And in the military, orders are orders, right? You gotta do what you're told because otherwise it can come back on you or your squad. The thing is, after you've followed these orders, after you've got the blood of kids on your hands and the war ends, you go home and get back to normal routines. What now? Does it eat away at you? Does it bury itself in your mind and you move on like it was all just a bad dream? Do you deserve forgiveness, redemption, another chance to make amends for what you did? Hell, for some of the people involved, do you even give a shit? Or do you deserve to have a possible righteous vengeance taken out on you from someone like Scar, an Ishvalan who's lost everything to this military nation, his family, friends, an entire culture? So he's justified in killing to get revenge, right? Even when his revenge quest sometimes causes him to kill people who just happened to be in the way and had no involvement in the war. Is it still justified since they're a part of the nation that wiped his people out? Even when those people might have been innocent wartime doctors who, despite being from that rival nation, focused more on helping anyone who was injured, race and religion aside. And with how far the effects of war can reach, going even to the daughter of those murdered doctors, does she deserve revenge on the person who killed her parents? It being done by someone who's lost everything he loved to an unjust war. You see, Fullmetal sure has its major plot with the father of Homunculus, the dwarf in the flask trying to open the gates and discover the truth of the world. And all of this stuff is really solid and enjoyable. But where Arakawa succeeded with FMA and created something that will stand the test of time is in this realistic back and forth between the cast who are, in one way or another, trying to both justify and grow from the things they did, even if it was wrong, morally or otherwise. All these years later, after the Ishvalan War has ended, the soldiers who took part in it have to find their own ways to cope, to justify their actions and to move forward in their lives. Mustang, who, despite using his flame alchemy power to turn both buildings and the Ishvalan people in them to ash, recognized the evil he was being commanded to do and, for his revenge, decided to claw his way to the top of the military to become Führer Roy Mustang, a thing that both Ed and his Lieutenant Hawkeye acknowledge won't just fix everything. It won't wipe the slate clean of the things they did, and both conflict and war itself won't go away unless the system they have is completely dismantled and reformed. But at this level and at this time, it's all that Mustang can do to try and atone for his actions. Hawkeye, with her own guilt, being his eyes, ears, and largely brain as he works his way to the top with her at his side. Major Armstrong is a fan favorite character. Dude's the big buff goofass who not only loves ripping his shirt off and flexing, literally radiating stars around his pecs, but is also strong-willed, lovable, a big sweetheart honestly. And thing is, during the war, he was ordered to wall off small villages so that there could be no escape from them. These small towns turning into death zones as the troops inside the walls blasted away people in their own homes, giving the big soft-hearted Major a mental breakdown and causing him to be court-martialed for not following all of the orders mid-battle, despite already having so much innocent blood on his hands. Dr. Marco, Major Hughes, I could go on with tons of the cast members. But the main point is that despite these people being so lovable, being the good guys, they all mostly have innocent skeletons in their closet, and are now trying to find purpose in their lives, to find a form of atonement, to see if they even deserve forgiveness. And right here, I think it's with this cast and their moral struggles that FMA is able to take itself and grow into something much more than just a shonen battle manga. But aside from this specific type of character writing, there's the actual plot of the series itself. Ed and Al's quest to fix their bodies that sweeps them up in government conspiracies, supernatural battles with weird humanoid monsters, and even confronting the concept of God itself. Now, real shit, I don't want to just outright spoil the final climactic moments and their entire lead up. FMA is one of the most famous anime/manga of all time. If you've not seen or read it, then just do it to say you've done it. But the stuff involving Father and his plan to be a JRPG villain would be a whole other 30 minutes in this video, so we're just gonna kinda gloss over that. Now, for what it's worth, Fullmetal does manage to take that grounded setting I gushed over earlier and inject this whole country-spanning mystery for our cast to follow. It legit being really fun and keeping you on the edge of your seat. A pretty perfect mix of shonen action, standard JRPG setups, and legit real-ass fantastic character writing. Now, I will say, and full spoilers here for the last few chapters and also for the ending of Gantz, I do think the concept of the gate and truth itself are both really cool, and visually raw as fuck. But they're as similar to me as the god alien at the end of Gantz. Something that, despite being way more foreshadowed here than in Gantz, is a plot device that just exists to explain the truth of the things real quick so the story can end with some closure. I don't hate it at all, but during this 2024 read, I for sure read through those chapters and said to myself, yeah, sure, I guess. And that was about the extent of my feelings on it. This is likely a case of me having watched and played so many similar things since 2011, stories about God and a protagonist's place in the world. So going back now, I can't help but compare it, that's just what it is. The more focused personal narratives are still standout and fantastic. Things like Edward's guilt over Al losing his body and the lengths he goes to so he can get it back are phenomenal. And I love Mustang and his boys' rise to power. These dipshits are the best. And more so now than on my original watches, I really loved von Hohenheim, Ed and Al's immortal dad who's actually based on Paracelsus, the real-life first documented alchemist that's credited with creating the concept of toxicology, his actual full name being Theophrastus von Hohenheim, with the Philosopher's Stone itself, the linchpin of the whole plot almost, actually being a major historical artifact that both scholars and scientists throughout history have dreamed about. A mythical substance that could supposedly turn basic metals into gold or silver. Hohenheim involved with the creation of that Philosopher's Stone and now being forced to wander endlessly with his immortality, losing anyone he loves, any friends he makes as they grow older and time stands still for him. Finally settling down with a family and not even feeling like he deserves to be with them due to his past in the city of Xerxes. Like he's nothing more than just a monster. Eventually leaving his wife and 2 children to continue on an endless quest of atonement. Maybe it's just where I lost my dad between then and 2011 and now that he hits different for me, but I don't care, bro is top tier, 10 out of 10. I could keep on going with things like Ling's quest to become immortal and the relationships with both his clan members and the homunculus Greed, Izumi Curtis and her entire character. The list is long and full of good shit, but I think it all boils down to the fact that there's a reason Fullmetal has stayed so relevant and beloved for all of these years, both from new fans to old. And it's this cast, it's these characters and the way they all flow and grow with each other. And real shit, I think they'll go on to keep standing the test of time, along with the overall commentary in Fullmetal, since our world seems to never be getting any better. But for me personally, I'm just grateful as hell this series even exists, because without it, this channel and likely me as I am now wouldn't exist. My love for manga and this huge ass collection. No matter what, Fullmetal will always have a special place in my heart for all of this. So, with all of that said, and the reasons I think the manga and writing itself is so strong, there's obviously 2 other huge reasons that Fullmetal became and remained as popular as it has for all of these years. The things that took an already extremely strong series and, in their own unique ways, elevated parts of it to whole new heights. And this, of course, would be its 2 separate anime adaptations. One just being referred to as 2003, and the other having the subtitle Brotherhood here in the West, both created by the same studio, Bones, them famous for tons of anime ranging from My Hero and Mob Psycho back to Soul Eater and Eureka 7. With Fullmetal, largely Brotherhood specifically, being one of their most famous productions. Between these 2 separate anime, they did have largely different leading crew members, characters, with Seiji Mizushima directing the 2003 adaptation and Yashiro Irie directing Brotherhood. But notably between them, Masahiko Minami, one of the co-founders of Bones who had worked at Sunrise for 15 years before starting this company, was the lead producer on O3 and involved with the production and planning of Brotherhood. So FMA had the backbones itself in the creation. And you can really tell from the fact that overall, despite me loving the manga, I think both anime are legit some of the best examples of manga adaptations you can get. Starting first with 2003, this anime is the one. It's the genesis point for me. Some personal history, but despite loving DBZ as a kid and enjoying tons of things like Yu Yu and Inuyasha growing up, I fell out of anime for a long time and didn't really get back into it until like 2010 probably? I remember one day on Xbox Live with my friends, anime got brought up and I made fun of the whole medium itself because being a dumb shit is what you do as a teenager in the early 2010s, to which my two friends said, "Man, I don't know, there's some good stuff out there. Try watching Fullmetal Alchemist on Netflix maybe, see what you think." This of course being the 2003 series. And I said, sure, fuck it, why not? And another quick tangent, but back in the early 2010s, Netflix on the Xbox 360 was the shit, dude. They had their entire catalog available to stream. TV shows, movies, all kinds of shit, and it was way before the streaming apocalypse we're in now. Every company having their own service with their own shows and their own payment plans. So the options were both mainstream, niche, and seemingly endless. Real ones know about the good, the bad, and the beautiful. But one of the early 360 functions they totally removed for no reason was party watching. Inviting people on your friends list to sync up and watch Netflix together. Bring that back, you fucking idiots. So we all watched the first few episodes of Fullmetal 2003, and about 6 of those episodes later, I said to them, well, fuck, you got me. And I binged the whole anime in a weekend because I was 15 with no responsibilities. And it obviously altered my path forever. Me immediately watching Brotherhood afterward, and from there, Gurren Lagann, Bebop, Evangelion, The Devil is a fucking part-timer. I was hooked and obviously still am to this day, all coming from a simple watch of Fullmetal 2003. As to what hooked me about it, well, what didn't? Between the extremely strong, super fluid and cool animation, the even stronger character writing and huge ass plot that leaves you hooked wanting more, it was easy to fall in love with. And as someone who was still dipping my toes into anime, also backed up with a dub that's ranked as one of the best there's ever been, up there with things like Space Dandy or the 80s Devilman OVA.
Head off and shit down your neck, okay?
And it just adds to the reasons newcomers can fall right into it. The cast mostly carrying over into Brotherhood as well, minus 1 or 2 original actors. Shout out Aaron Dismuke as Alphonse in 2003. I kinda prefer him to Maxie Whitehead's version, but that's just personal preference. That's just me. No interest in talking about Ed's VA, largely because the people who overly like him can be a little weirdly intense. So that all aside, I think Edward's English voice absolutely does nail the character of Edward. To me, it really is one of the most memorable dub performances in all of anime. The nostalgia has a hold on me, what can I say? Now, as any fan of FMA knows, 2003 was produced while the manga was still ongoing, meaning that despite having a good little chunk of material to work with, the back half of the anime is a totally unique story that goes in a completely different direction from the manga. Arakawa herself was largely involved with this anime's production team, But seeing as how she was busy with the manga itself and both didn't want to be hindered by working with an anime, as well as not wanting to slow down Bones' production, she instead just worked with them to help develop their own story and ending, letting the studio come up with new and different explanations for the homunculus, the gate, the entire character of Dante and what they do in the plot. Meaning that you could call this a filler ending, but it's so significant in Arakawa herself being involved with it that in my opinion, it still stands on its own. Even if that new story, at least to me, does fall a bit more flat in its climax and conclusion when compared to the all-out war in Central with all of its big-time shonen battles. But where 2003 succeeds in my eyes in both over Brotherhood and in some ways the original manga is in the early to middle episodes, the episodes that actually still are mostly manga canon content. But here in this anime, probably due to the fact that they wanted to give the manga more time to progress and needed to stretch things out a bit, the early episodes are much slower paced than the manga, adding in anime-only stories where Ed and Al go on one-off adventures and meet characters that add small levels of depth to the world alongside that main cast. People like the fake Elric brothers or the nurse/thief are all really solid additions that help extend the anime's length in a way that never feels forced at all. And outside of the totally new additions, Bones takes existing scenes and reworks a lot of them to extend a bit longer than they do in the manga, adding a character here or there that isn't originally in this chapter but gives them more time on screen. And it's a big reason the cast has become so beloved over the years. The 2003 anime taking Maze Hughes, who in the manga doesn't really get a huge amount of time on page, and injects him in tons of new places, letting him be that goofy, loving, but extremely competent dad way more than he got to in the manga. And some slight but extremely well-known spoilers right here, he actually shows up in episode 5 of the 2003 anime, and lasts until episode 25, so 20 total episodes, with him only appearing in 10 episodes of Brotherhood and 9 total chapters of the manga before the events go down. And that's not to devalue those early parts of Brotherhood or the manga compared to 2003, but I think this edition overall in some ways makes 2003 excel over its counterparts. And this is a feeling I get for not just Hughes, but also for Shao Tucker and Nina. Their story being one of the biggest and lamest memes online. It's 2025, can we stop quoting it, gang? But it has stood the test of time due to how sad it made people from spending these few episodes with them. The viewer developing a small attachment to Nina and Alexander the dog before Tucker turns him into the combo furry, with their actual presence in both the manga and Brotherhood being just a single episode and chapter each. And honestly, I just wonder if this whole thing with Nina would have caught on online like it has if Brotherhood had happened first and not 2003. Will say though, don't like what 2003 does with Tucker after this. Why's he gotta be the whispering dog thing? Obviously, these things aside, the big conversation comes at the halfway point where the plot begins to totally do its own thing. Which my very quick non-spoiler review of it is, god damn, that shit is goofy but kind of interesting. And regardless of how me or anyone feels about the new plot points in this overall ending, 2003 was a landmark anime that swept over the world. The popularity of Fullmetal Alchemist as a series growing, it regularly appearing now on the covers of monthly shonen Gangan with constant color pages back to back. The only other thing in the magazine with that same level of popularity at the time being Soul Eater. And with this huge new popularity and the manga in its final stages around 2009, Bones came back for round 2 to do a completely new, fully faithful adaptation. The overall animation and seemingly budget itself being a huge step up from 2003 and, like before, sweeping across the globe. Fullmetal reaching yet another level of mass appeal. So where Fullmetal 2003 created a new and dedicated fandom to the series, it was with Brotherhood in 2009 that really took everything to the next level. The reboot anime by Studio Bones that ran for 64 episodes, it being the definition of all killer no filler, for better or worse. Going back to 2003, it has some fantastic fight scenes that still hold up really well to this day. But jumping ahead with Brotherhood all these years later, and at least in my opinion, every one of those fights is a whole ass upgrade in the animation department. Taking the already dope ass battles from the manga and elevating them to explosive, violent, and vivid back and forths. Characters throwing alchemic attacks at each other while mixing in some heavy hand-to-hand ass beatdowns. One of the coolest moments in the manga is Mustang's execution of Lust. Him snapping his fingers over and over from panel to panel, burning the homunculus to ash. The anime taking that moment and turning it into one of the most famous anime moments of all time. The beautiful and colorful animation mixing with the stellar sound design, fantastic voice acting, and overall intensity of the moment. Shit had me pacing around my room and clapping my hands like a 45-year-old whose favorite college team is deep in second overtime. Now, where 2003's official canon episodes end about halfway through and it starts to drift into another plotline, Brotherhood has the full story past that split and, in my opinion, was where a lot of the best stuff in Fullmetal was created. The original anime never getting to things like the Northern Wall and Commander Briggs Armstrong, completely cutting out the Shin characters like Ling and Mei Chang, adding in my opinion, really bad anime-only homunculus that fills the role of Wrath and changes the role of Pride, with the canon versions of those two sins being way cooler in the manga/Brotherhood. Now, with this said, and Brotherhood being that much more faithful adaptation, this does mean the earlier things I mentioned involving the filler from 2003 and the way it extended characters' presence in the story are not here in Brotherhood. And while I don't think it necessarily hurts the anime by not having that filler, I do 100% think it does hurt in the fact that certain parts of the early story move at a much quicker pace. And with that, by extension, characters like Hughes or Nina get much less screen time. And at least to me, if I had watched Brotherhood first, I'm not sure I'd feel the same attachment that 2003 watchers felt to them. Like in my 2024 read-through of the manga, I was kinda shocked at how quick those moments went by and how Hughes, one of the most famous characters in the franchise, was actually barely around when he was around. Brotherhood, of course, faithfully adapting this and him just not really making that same impression like he did in 03. Oh, and also, Brotherhood just totally skipped over the mining town of Usewell in the introduction of Yoki's dumbass, which, seeing how he kinda becomes consistently relevant in later chapters, that was dumb. So, what do I mean by all of this? I don't know really. Nothing, I guess. It's all mainly just to say that I've seen the question online for years now of, should I watch 2003 or just skip to Brotherhood? And that's even an argument I've had with my own friends. So on my side of things, if you can't tell, nah, I don't think you should skip 03 if you're already interested. Sure, starting with Brotherhood is totally fine, There's no real wrong answer here. But for me and my experience with all three forms of Fullmetal, I really do think they all complement each other in unique and interesting ways. But hey, isn't this an amazing problem to even have in the first place? Oh no, this landmark manga has two very good and equally significant anime, and I might have to watch every episode that are each filled with great moments apiece. Like, you can't really lose here. Well, I do actually kind of dislike the first episode of Brotherhood. It's the one real filler episode that takes place at a random early point in the story and unnecessarily hints at things it probably shouldn't have until later. Not really sure why it's here, honestly. And lastly, each series has a movie to accompany it. 2003's being The Conqueror of Shambhala, and Brotherhood's called The Sacred Star of Milos or Milos. Now for Brotherhood, Milos is pretty much standard shonen animated movie. Like, you know what it is, taking place at a random point in the series and not having any actual bearing on the plot itself. Mainly just being an extremely well animated adventure for Ed and Al to go on, finding a problem to solve and fighting some bad dudes. Solid as hell, but that's really it. With 03's Conqueror of Shambhala, this is actually the true ending to the anime, being a full-on sequel epilogue that explains some things left open at the end of 03 and fully resolving the plot in a way that was pretty solid. So basically, Star of Milos is up to you, but if you watch 03, you are required to watch Shambhala. Anyway, with those comparisons between the two, all of this is really to say that no matter how you choose to consume Fullmetal, it's a great way to do it. I just personally recommend doing 2003 before Brotherhood. So, when it comes to the manga, Fullmetal has two American releases. One being the original Viz paperbacks, it collected and sold in a box set, and the Fullmetal edition hardcovers, 1.5 size volumes that have more chapters in them, reducing the volume count down from 27 to 18 total. Both are still for sale and widely available online, but if you have to pick one, get the Fullmetal edition. Got the color pages, glossy white and deep dark inkings, and an updated translation, correcting things like the original Viz edition saying Ishbal and not Ishval, or spelling Xerxes as Sexlixes, which is probably still pronounced Xerxes. As for the anime, well, Brotherhood's no issue. You can buy its Blu-rays, watch it on streaming services, both dubbed and subbed. Shit's as easy as me after one drink. Now, for some reason, Fullmetal 2003 is just fucking gone. Like, not only is it streaming nowhere, its Blu-ray and physical releases are long out of print, meaning that the only way to watch one of the highest rated anime of all time is through backdoor methods. This shit is stupid, dude, and leads into a much bigger conversation about the hellish age of streaming, copyrights, the death of physical media, and also Sony's chokehold on both anime and manga here in the West. I don't know, I fucking hate this world we're in. But as of this video when recording in early 2025, Fullmetal 03 is seemingly lost to time. What a fucking shame, dude. Lastly, since the end of Fullmetal, Arakawa has had a few other series, and despite them not reaching that same level of popularity that Fullmetal did, they're all solid in their own right. Well, mostly. Silver Spoon was the next monthly series after Fullmetal, it being taken heavily from her childhood dairy farm life, being a series literally about exactly that, and is actually Secret Peak, but that's a long convo for another day, wink wink. Besides that, there's two other major things, one being called Daemons of the Shadow Realm, titled The Hinge of the Underworld in Japan, which is her currently running series, and there's also her manga adaptation of the Heroic Legends of Arslan, based on a light novel series. Now, I've not read Daemons of the Shadow Realm, kinda just waiting for it to end, but it looks solid enough and I'm usually down for whatever she does, so I'm good to wait. Thing is, being down for whatever she does means that I read some of Arslan before dropping and selling my volumes. Now, to be fair, this is adapting an already written story, so maybe those original books just weren't my thing, but man, it was just sauceless. I don't know. Sorry, I guess. These all have English publications and can be found easily, so check out Silver Spoon for sure and do whatever on the others. Thanks for watching, hit the shit, and sorry this video took a minute. Like I said, I was in Japan for a few weeks and had to recalibrate when I got home. I'll make it up to you in the next video. It's gonna be probably double the length of this one. Been in the oven for a minute, so see you next time with a threefold deep dive.